Hello everybody, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Pramod Nair. I teach at the Department of English, the University of Hyderabad. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at sporting cultures as part of the larger cultural studies lesson modules that you have been dealing with. What are the objectives of this particular module? We'll be looking at sporting cultures within the era of televised sports. So we are not looking at pre-television sporting programs. We will look at how meaning is generated through spectacle, the role of subject, that is sport experts, the question of media involvement, and the question of the audience. It will teach you concepts which can be used to study other youth cultures such as comics, social networking sites, cell phone apps, among others. First, a short introduction to sporting cultures. Sporting cultures in the televised era have become immensely profitable in terms of the money generated out of the television and online streaming of programs. They are also major sources of revenue in terms of advertisements and branding. As a consequence, media outlets package sports to be bought and consumed like any other consumer project. Packaging of sporting cultures, which is integral to how sporting cultures are sold, refers to the process through which particular meanings in sporting cultures have been associated with, say, the show itself, the actual sport, the celebrity, and so on and so forth. TV shows, newspapers, magazines, and online content are part of the packaging of sporting cultures. What do we mean when we say the production of sports? Media constructs meaning around specific sports and sports personalities. This meaning is generated through narratives and rhetorical strategies. By focusing on the process of the mass media's production of sports cultures, this module will concentrate on the strategies through which people are persuaded to consume sports as a commodity. Do understand, we are treating sports as any other commodity. First, the role of sport experts. Sports experts are a class of sports professionals who have the legitimacy and authority to interpret sports for the audience. Their legitimacy comes from their prior association with the sport. The role of experts reporting sports before the advent of television coverage was very different, as they had to recreate the sporting action to fans who are not present at the venue. The contemporary fan, however, can watch his favorite sports in the comfort of his home on television. So the experience of sports now is radically different from when, say, in the ancient Roman world, people actually had to go out into the stadium and witness the physical action unfolding on the screen, on the grounds. The expert does not describe the passage of the play, because the passage of the play is visible to all of you as you are watching it on screen, but instead it decodes the images that the fan views. In other words, what we are looking at is the interpretation of the images of sport rather than the actual action. Sport experts in the contemporary era cannot limit themselves to describing the sport action itself, but need to also muster some excitement about it, some history of the sport, and predict the future of that particular game. In other words, the sport experts have to pay attention to the interesting and meaningful parts of the match and not restrict themselves to just the action unfolding at that particular moment. The sports expert also provides intimate access to television viewers through technological aids like the instant replay. Experts address different kinds of fans: the avid watcher, the casual fan, and the novice. This is the reason why we see an entire panel of experts covering a sport instead of just a single commentator, as used to be the case. We need to understand that the people who view a television program can never be predicted in terms of their demographics. We do not quite know who's watching. As a result, you need a wide variety of people to comment on various aspects of the game. This diverse panel of experts is involved in making the viewing of sports a pleasurable experience and ensures that different segments of the audience all relate to the program and the sport in some way. What is the role of the sport celebrity? Sports is presented in terms of stars and narratives about stars. The media puts into narrative the events of sports, transforming them into stories with stars and characters such as heroes and villains. You might recall the figure of Lance Armstrong as a particular case in point. Once arguably the greatest athlete the world has ever known, after the discovery of his drug doping scandals, was suddenly diminished in size, in personality, and in terms of audience appeal. You have a hero who then becomes a villain in the eye of the sporting fan. Sports celebrities are identifiable individuals. They are constructed through certain images and narratives with whom the audience is expected to possess or develop some kind of emotional attachment. Though the viewer or fan may never physically meet the celebrity, the sportsman personally or face to face, the fan is required to feel an amount of intimacy or emotional attachment with the image of the sports person. What I want you to recognize here is that you do not necessarily find yourself affiliated with or attached to the sports person, but to the image of the sports person, and that image is a media construction. That is, the image of the sportsman constructed and proliferated across media in the form of pictures, personal life stories, and interviews are what you relate to. You never actually meet Sachin Tendulkar, you meet an image of Sachin Tendulkar. The popularity of a sports celebrity is constructed through this process of image making and image distribution, and in the present context across multiple media platforms, of course. Sports celebrities are therefore the effect of the packaging of sports for audiences. They are presented to you in a particular way. Several of you might be aware that David Beckham is less known for his football abilities than his fashion status. He gets packaged in a particular way. The packaging initially was based on his skills on the football field. Now it is no more the case. However, this does not diminish Beckham in any way as a recognizable personality, though football is not what he is anymore known for. The more coverage an image gets, the easier it is to recall to our memory that particular player. The image of a player is constructed through different positive and negative narratives. Drug taking, the misuse of your wealth, construct you as a person who is unable to cope with your sporting status. The hero, of course, remains an untarnished image of great physical abilities, but also unimpeachable integrity. A narrative can be thought of in our particular module as a means of representation. A representation employed by a particular speaker or speakers who then orders a set of events for an audience. Each narrative about a celebrity sportsman highlights his or her unique features, and each player is characterized by a specific narrative who embodies those features. I now move on to the question of sport as entertainment and as spectacle. This is particularly the case to be studied for the simple reason that there is no sport today which is not a media spectacle. You cannot anymore de-link the media images, the media expression, and the media capture of sport than the actual physical event themselves. In the ancient world, the Olympics were physical events. They are now more televised events than physical events. As the market for sports expanded, sports programmers have started competing with major television shows for a share of the audience. Sports is now packaged as entertainment to compete with other shows on television. This involves presenting the game as a spectacular display and introducing a sense of drama into the narration of action on the pitch. The change in commentaries for football or Wimbledon or cricket is something that should tell you that the nature of commentary being changed is a change in the nature of the sport itself. Sport is not just, as somebody famously said, a war by other means. It's spectacle. It has to be drama, and therefore has to be dramatic. John Fiske, a leading cultural theorist, has argued that the spectacular involves an exaggeration of the pleasure of looking. It exaggerates the visible, it magnifies and foregrounds the surface appearance, and refuses meaning or depth. The consequence of this exaggeration of the visual is that there remains very little meaning behind the spectacle. What you see is the meaning of the spectacle. The only memory of the match for the fan would be, therefore, the few spectacular moments reminisced through highlights that are done at the end of the day's play. If you recall the IPL is characterized more by the highlights being presented to you one after the other, back to back, to heighten the dramatic tension. You tend to remember the events from the highlights, not from the actual match. The construction of a spectacle is complemented by adding a sense of drama to the match. This is usually achieved through narratives creating intense and bitter rivalries between the competing teams. Some examples of the world of sports famous rivalries would include, naturally, the Indo-Pakistan cricket matches, the Ashes series in cricket, the Real Madrid-Barcelona matches in football. The construction of the match as a spectacle makes the process of viewing far more entertaining and thrilling. The viewer does not watch the match solely to enjoy seeing the game, but also to experience the thrill and the drama introduced into the match with the 8 of the strategies discussed earlier. Do understand, these strategies are not part of the actual action. It is the way the media presents those events that make it dramatic. I now move on to the question of branding. A brand is not a singular object, but a product range, distinguishable from other objects. Whether it is tea or vehicles or people, a brand is unique to that particular range and distinguishes it from another similar object. When a player reaches the stature of a brand, then he or she is associated with a range of products, where the characteristics of the player are associated with or transferred onto the product. A brand is a set of meanings. It is a set of values attached to a standardized good or product to generate desire. Branding allows manufacturers to associate the product with specific value systems and therefore to target specific audiences. Brands, however, are not attached to the products themselves, and the characteristics of a brand can be transferred from one set of products to another with ease. So Rahul Dravid can advertise for both shaving blades and insurance. It's not the shaving blade or the insurance, but Rahul Dravid that constitutes the connection between these two apparently unconnected products. As brands grow, they can acquire semantic autonomy, as in their meaning is distinctive and separate from the product themselves. And they can be transformed into a self-signifying product through the force of memory. The life of a brand is not restricted to on-field performances alone, but is dependent on the recognizability of the brand in collective public memory. If you think very carefully about advertisements of retired sports stars, we may not necessarily remember their achievements on the field. We may not necessarily remember the brands they are associated with, but the player is the brand. The product gets associative celebrity status, associative brand status, delinked from the original actions, the heroics of the player on field. A brand is therefore not restricted to a narrative of an image, but is an assemblage of multiple meanings which can therefore be used to sell a diverse range of products. To go back to the example I gave you, Rahul Dravid being used to sell both insurance and shaving blades. Please note that neither of the products has anything to do with cricket. I now move on to the audience end of things, the consumption of sport cultures. The process of consumption of sports is interwoven with desire, wish fulfillment of the fan. Fans can consume, appropriate, or subvert meaning that is packaged around sports. Consumption could be restricted to watching the presentation of the match on television, reading reports about this match, or reading interviews or analysis about particular players and particular matches. It could also be consumed, if you look at contemporary sport cultures today, by purchasing symbols of the sport, which includes t-shirts, posters, team merchandise, etc. Fans can appropriate elements of mass-produced fan cultures and place it into a new culture, creating new meanings. Such a process is often referred to as bricolage. What you need to understand here is that it is not the sport but the products associated with the sport. It is not the person but the various devices, merchandise and products associated with the game that is being marketed. In other words, what you need to understand is the consumption of sport culture is not restricted to the consumption of the game. The game is only one element in the larger set of products and services and images that we consume and receive. Fans choose their allegiances to players and teams to construct a sense of self for the individual and to differentiate them from others. A fan must perform his loyalty to the team. This could be done in multiple ways. You wear the team colors, you wear shoes endorsed by the favorite players from the team, you sport haircuts and styles, tattoos of one's favorite player. The most violent example of this is usually the English football fan, whose ability to transform the field into a battle zone favoring this or that team is now legendary. The fan is not necessarily involved with the particular team as just an observer. In fact, the fan is integral to the brand image of the team. Oh, this particular team has this kind of fan following. In fact, if you look at the FIFA World Cup recently concluded, there was more police force employed to control the English football fan than for any other country on earth. This should tell you something about what fan cultures are. This performance of fandom is not restricted to accessories alone, but it also comprises fans' show of support as an active physical support in the stadium. Being a fan involves active, enthusiastic, participatory engagement with one's favorite team. Fans, however, also often subvert the status quo by refusing to adhere to the boundaries constructed culturally for players and viewers. This is particularly true if your team loses a match. If your team loses a match, you generally see the fans explode onto the field, attacking their own players, being nasty to the other team, digging up the pitch, and so on and so forth. Fans, for instance, can be admitted into the stadium on the understanding that they will not attempt to disrupt the outcome of the game and sport. And it goes back to the example I just gave you, the English football fan. In fact, English football hooliganism is an entire cultural studies project today. But there exist several reported cases of fan disruption, where fans subvert their role as passive consumers and instead attempt to directly interfere with the way the game is proceeding. To summarize what we have looked at in this module so far, the module's focus was sporting cultures. The argument made essentially was that sporting cultures cannot be restricted to the game or the event of the game alone. Sporting cultures need to be studied through various other strategies that constitute the game as one, a spectacle. 2, it looked at the role of sports experts. 3, it looked at celebrities, sporting celebrities. Next, it looked at the question and the theme and the concept of the brand that is built around the figure of the sports personality and not necessarily the game alone. Finally, it looked at the role of the fan and fan cultures that constitute the meaning of a particular event of games. The emphasis that I would like to draw your attention to is that sporting cultures cannot be read in terms of the game alone. The game constitutes 1% of what sport culture actually is about. Because we focused on the sport in the age of television and mass media, you need to see sporting cultures as a heavily media-driven event. And this media-driven event has several other factors, whether it is the t-shirt of Manchester United that my colleague's son is very fond of wearing, the autographs that people collect, the IPL or FIFA curtain raisers. The event is grouped, is packaged within a whole set of other devices and meanings. And the meaning of a game for us is the sum total of all these other factors and elements. In short, you can only study sport cultures when you can connect the game to all these other apparatuses, and our sense of the sport is the sum total of the meanings produced by all these other factors. Before I conclude, I would also like to give you a short reading list which will help you understand some of the themes that we have been talking about. One of the major texts in the study of sports celebrities is David Andrews and Steven Jackson's Sports Stars, The Cultural Politics of Sporting Celebrity, New York, Routledge, 2001. The overall framework for popular culture might be read very easily from the celebrated John Fiske book, Understanding Popular Culture. It was a 1989 book, but still very relevant. The question of the brand might be read within John Froe's key essay, Signature and Brand, in a volume edited by Jim Collins called Hype Hop, Making Culture into Public Entertainment. Sports cultures, other detailed studies include Tony Sherutow's Understanding Sports Cultures and David Andrews and Steven Jackson's Sports, Culture and Advertising, Identities, Commodities and the Politics of Representation. Thank you.